Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. Now, the National Freedom Party has challenged Basic Education Minister Angie to demonstrate her willingness to eradicate pit latrine toilets at our schools. Motshekga held a briefing earlier on today where she conceded that work had been done to try eradicate these pit latrines, but also mentioned that a whole lot more work needs to be done. I think the figure was around 800. Some of the institutions that are still struggling, perhaps that have been overlooked, and having to deal with these pit latrines. The General Secretary of the National Freedom Party is Canaan Mdletshe, who I believe joins us via our video link still, if he is still there. And Bob Mdletshe, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. I mean, you say you're challenging the minister to finally do right by really some of these pupils, but there was a ruling back in 2020 where government was essentially instructed to identify schools that still have pit latrines and to make sure that those pit latrines are no longer there. What makes you think the government will be able to finish within the next year what they've struggled to finish in 3 years?
Good afternoon, Ayanda, and good day to the viewers at home. Quite frankly, Ayanda, one must say that we are challenging the minister, but we know pretty well that the minister is not going to do anything about it because the Basic Education Department has dismally failed not only to honor the High Court ruling, but also just to do the honorable thing and embrace what is happening in our country. We can tell that the minister is out of touch with the reality. She has indicated that she is relying on the provinces which are giving her false information. The truth of the matter is our schools are in shambles. We've got pit latrines not only in 3 provinces as per the minister's announcement, but in almost 5 provinces across the country have got the same problem. And KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape and Limpopo are hardest hit. And we've got a minister who can come to the public and lie at our faces and say that they're eradicating pit latrines when the fact is nothing has been done, nothing's being done on the ground.
You know, of course, there's been a story that's kind of linked us to this and probably what prompted the minister to finally have this briefing. Earlier on this month, we heard of Langalami Viki in the Eastern Cape, yet another child who died after falling into a pit latrine there. Part of what the minister said is that in that particular case, that school actually did have the proper sanitation, and somehow this child found themselves at this particular pit latrine, and that's how they eventually died. Does that sound good enough to you?
Not at all. You see, that's why I said earlier that we've got the minister who's out of touch with the reality. If the minister can go to various schools in rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape and Limpopo and get a first-hand information, not relying on the provinces to give a false information. The reality is, if you go to these schools, Ayanda, you will find that our kids have to endure a horrible smell. 5 days a week. Can you imagine your child going to a school every day in the morning and sometimes during the day they have to go and eat inside the school when there's this smell? But because it's kids from poor backgrounds, it's kids from rural areas where people have got no status, this is what is happening. That's why we are saying the minister should go there and perhaps spend a day in one of those schools, eat her lunch during the kids at the school so that she can be able then to get a first-hand information, because relying on other people to give information and to come out to the public and make pronouncements which are not true is demonstrating that we've got the ministers, in fact, we've got the government and cabinet that does not care. Because if minister had a child in a rural area or a grandchild in one of those provinces, I will tell you, we will not be discussing this matter, because what is clearly happening in our country is that families or kids from rich families are taken care of, when if you look at the families from poor backgrounds, that's where the problem is. You are saying the minister must go to one of the schools, spend a day in a school and eat her lunch with the kids in those schools so that she can get a first-hand information and experience of what our kids are going through on a daily basis. And here we are talking about over 1 million kids who are affected by these pit latrine issues in our country. That's why we are saying ministers must go there. We would appreciate if even the president can join the minister in one of the schools where they are using pit latrine so that they can get a first-hand experience.
Yeah, you know, it's been almost a decade since Michael Komape fell into a pit latrine and died. That's the 5-year-old who sadly died in this tragic way in Polokwane. And I make reference to that particular incident because at that time there was this widespread outrage. In fact, it's the family that even went to court, eventually getting that ruling from the courts that government must identify these schools in 2020 and make sure that they fix the problem. that time has come and gone. You know, it's almost 10 years, like I mentioned. And the sense I'm getting, unfortunately, is that sadly, perhaps even the media is complicit in this. There are bouts of outrage throughout the years that bring a spotlight onto the story, and then eventually we forget. And sadly, what happens in the interim is that more children keep dying, as we've seen earlier on this month. What kind of accountability do you reckon we should be taking as society for how long it's taken to fix this?
I think first and foremost, as members of the community, we must take our ministers, we must make sure that the ministers are accountable. Because one of the challenges that we are confronted with is the reality that some of the people within our society believe that if the minister says she's going to do this and she doesn't do it, no one says, Minister, you said you are going to eradicate pit latrines in the next financial year. Nothing has happened. And perhaps one of the things that the ministers or the government should be doing now is that as public members, we should be having a performance agreement of all the ministers so that we know what they've agreed before the president that they are going to achieve over the financial year, because so that you are able to hold them accountable. Because the ministers can make promises and they don't keep them, nothing happens to them. They will come 5 years, they will be reappointed as ministers, as we have seen in this case, because Minister Angie Motshekga should not be a basic education minister as we speak right now, because she has dismally failed in her duties. She has got a constitutional obligation to make sure that our kids are safe in schools, but she's the one who's committing one of the heinous crimes in the country by keep on making promises and not doing anything, not doing enough to eradicate pit latrine toilets. We heard even the DG this morning saying that by the end of this financial year, half of the schools, of 800 schools, are going to have toilets that are functioning properly. But the reality is that is not going to happen. But unfortunately, no one is going to ask the minister and the DG after the end of financial year whether they were able to achieve those promises. The reality is, as members of the society, we have to take it upon ourselves now to hold ministers accountable, because clearly the president does not care whether the ministers achieve their goals. As I've said, ministers sign performance agreements every year, but we don't know as members of the public what exactly they said they're going to do. That is why we are saying that all those performance agreements must be made public so that you are able to hold the ministers accountable.
Right. You've been quoted as calling for a state of disaster to be declared in order to respond to this particular issue. Now, given our recent history with this particular provision, do you really think that will help? Unfortunately,
that's what you can rely on at the moment, Ayanda and the viewers. Nothing else we've got in our disposal which you can use. We are hoping that if the state of disaster is declared on this pit latrine crisis in the country, maybe there will be funds that will be channeled to infrastructure so that we will have these matters dealt with. But unfortunately, again, Ayanda, we've got a government that does not care. We've got a minister who is heartless, the minister who does not care whether one child dies and because of he fell on a pit latrine or what. She doesn't care. All the minister wants is to make sure, all the minister cares about is to see herself getting a salary at the end of the month. And that's what she's there for. Because if the minister cared about our kids, she would have prioritized eradicating pit latrines in our schools. But because her children and grandchildren go to Mdletshe schools, they go to schools in Sentin, she doesn't care. It's high time, perhaps, Ayanda, that as members of the public again, we hold these ministers accountable. Because if we are not doing that, we'll be complaining and talking about these issues over the next 10 years, which should not be the case. Even the constitution of this country clearly stipulates that our kids have got a right to basic education, they've got a right to sanitation in school, but it's not happening on the ground. That's why we're saying perhaps it's up to us as members of the public now to take charge, because at the end of the day, it's our kids that die, not the minister's children.
Yeah, and I think what would be equally disconcerting is if this issue were ever to be used for any kind of political expediency. Hopefully we never get into that realm. Canaan Mdletshe, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Reacting to us there. He's a General Secretary of the National Freedom Party. Once again, appreciate your time.